So this is not like this wavy gravy kind of practice. This is a practice that really asks us to do some soul searching and to make some hard choices. And frankly, it's a practice that will challenge toxic energy in our lives. So it ends up inviting us to make a lot of concrete changes with who is even in our lives.
This is Rebel Therapist, a podcast for entrepreneurs who are trained as therapists and who want to level up their businesses, make a bigger impact, feel fulfilled, and be very well paid. I'm your host, Annie Schusler. I've been paying attention to my guest's work for probably almost 10 years. As soon as I heard her talking about following energy in your life, I was intrigued. It felt deeply right to me. And I also felt like, I'm not ready for that. I wasn't ready to fully take in her ideas because I was a bit more in push and hustle and suffer mode. I think part of me believed that following energy would mean not getting shit done. And as the breadwinner in my family, I wasn't open to that. I felt like following energy might lead me to laziness. And I know there's all kinds of fucked up messaging in that. But that was part of how I was feeling at the time. But I kept reading her emails here and there, and I kept listening to what she had to say. I've been noticing that I'm making a bigger impact, and it's not by hustling, but by getting into alignment and focusing on the most important things. My colleagues and clients and podcast guests have been coming through with this theme in a big way in 2021. So I say all that to say I am completely and totally ready for Staci Boden's message. And I think you are too. A little bit more about Staci before we dive into the interview. Staci Boden is a fiercely loving guide, energy healer, facilitator, ceremonialist, and author of Turning Dead Ends into Doorways. For over 20 years, she's been teaching people how to follow energy as a way to navigate anxiety, transform codependency, and relocate power inside. As a founder of 7 Directions, a 19-year-old dance ceremony, Staci also holds 7 Directions evenings, ongoing women's circles, retreat weekends, and facilitator trainings across the SF Bay Area and now globally online. Let's dive into following energy in your life and business with Staci Boden. Welcome, Staci. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Annie. It's a delight to be here.
So when we last talked, you shared with me a story that I've been thinking about ever since, about how you became aware of a tingling in your hands and how that led you down a path. Would you mind sharing that story as it shows up today for you?
Sure. So when I was 14, I went on a trip with my dad, and my dad is a meditator of many, many years. So I was invited to go on a trip with him. And the whole trip was really an awakening for me in my life. I was at a point where, believe it or not, I think I was a little depressed. I felt a little lost. I remember a lot of Sunday afternoons feeling really lonely and watching a lot of TV. And so I went on this trip with him because, why not go on a trip with your dad and his spiritual community? And there were a lot of things that happened on that trip to awaken me. One of them, so by the time I got to that moment sitting in the church that we talked about, there were other things that had happened where I was experiencing things inside of me, things in my dreams, things in my body that were talking to me. And there was a mirroring that was happening in daily life of synchronicities. That was already in motion. And then one day, we were taking tours of places and we went to a church, and I am, white Ashkenazi, 100% Jewish, very culturally identified, not religiously identified. And I did not enjoy going around this church. And I sat down at a bench somewhere, with a statue in front of Mary. And I just remember pretty much talking to her, because as a Jew, I feel very comfortable being in my questioning self and having struggling conversations. And so I just kind of started talking to her inside myself and saying, hey, you know what? Like, this is no offense. Like, this is not my place. My Jewish ancestors would not like me to be here. I have nothing against you and your son. I know that he's a great teacher, but he's not, I know he's a nice Jewish boy, but he's not my bag. But I do want to say that I'm here and I'm offering respect for sitting here in this moment with you. And then suddenly at 15 years old, my hands started tingling. And it was shocking to me. I didn't really understand it at the time. But from then on, as I moved through life, whenever something, quote, spiritual was happening, my hands would tingle. So my hands became a barometer. My tingling hands became a barometer to identify something spiritual happening and for me to pay attention to what was happening in daily life.
15.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what I guess one thing that I'm really curious about is how often do your hands tingle in your life now? I know that's like such a linear question, but I'm
All the
so
time.
curious. Oh.
My hands continue to be a barometer in my life, and not only my hands, but my whole body. So that I will be in situations, whether I'm sitting with a client or I'm in a group, and suddenly different parts of my body, my stomach, my heart, my hands, my head, my feet will start to have a different sensation than what I would say is, balanced and grounded. And I've learned to pay attention deeply to these different sensations as a point of awareness, as a guide, as a message, as something to follow.
And at one point, you had considered becoming a psychotherapist, right?
Yes.
What guided you to becoming a different kind of healer?
So I can't sit here and say that there was one defining moment where I made a conscious choice to not become a therapist, because I started on this path of being of service from a very young age. I knew starting at, 15, 14, that I wanted to be of service to humans in the world, and that I wanted to be of service as a point of transformation and consciousness. So with that awakening at 15, I got politically active in my high school years. And then I just began exploring lots of different ways to be of service. And my mom is a therapist. So I grew up, with a mom as a therapist and witnessing kind of what that life was like. So I had it as part of my foundation to consider, for sure. But really, when I was about 23 or 24, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I thought I was going to be a mediator. I went to law school for a year. I absolutely hated it. And I actually could not really do it. I'd always been a straight A student, but I actually was not succeeding in law school because I just could not accept the mindset. And I came to kind of a fork in the road and left law school, made a choice to leave law school. And at that point, my hands were still tingling. I was doing a lot of kind of on the side spiritual investigation with different practices, earth-based practices. I really loved Starhawk at the time. And I really liked Tarot at the time. This was back, again, 25 years ago. And there was a fork in the road. And I left law school, and I had been receiving these pamphlets and seeing these pamphlets all over San Francisco, which is where I grew up, from this place called this, CIS, the Center for, the California Institute of Integral Studies, about this program in women's spirituality. And women's spirituality, like, it became that symbol of, like, if I was only following my heart in my life, I would get to do something like this. And so when I left law school, we moved. I had just married my husband, who I'm still with after 30 years, happily married. we had moved from San Francisco to the coast to Half Moon Bay because he was in grad school and I was in grad school, and it was the point in between. And I had left law school, and I was literally 3 days in wandering around, Half Moon Bay with him, when one day I walked into this store called Onacia Healing Tools. And I walked in, I looked around. Alex, my husband, looked at me and he said, "You need to come back here when you have about 3 hours." And I said, "Yes." And then I came back that afternoon. And when I walked in, there was a woman in the store named Margareta. And I started talking to her, and I was at this choice point between at that point between CIIS or ITP. It was called the Sophia ITP, I believe, in Palo Alto. So I was at a fork in the road between psychology and women's spirituality. And I started talking to this woman, and she herself was at ITP, and the other store owner, whose name was Maggie, was at CIIS Women's Spirituality. So at that point, I started talking with them. I started jumping up and down because here I was once again having this experience of a felt experience of being, urging to come back into this store, and then arriving there and having this synchronicity of these two people who would become my teachers, really illustrating the choice point that I was at in the fork in the road. And I spoke with both of them, and I made a choice to enter into CIIS and the Women's Spirituality program. But it wasn't like, oh, I'm not going to be a therapist, so therefore I'm going on this path. It was a choice to give myself the gift of following my heart through choosing women's spirituality. So again, I was having these experiences starting at a young age of 15 years old, of having a felt experience inside and then having a reality show up in my daily life that would mirror it, become a diving off point for conversation. I was having that happen a lot. Okay. So that showed up when I was 15. It continued. It happened when I left law school. It kept happening over and over again. And I didn't have a name for it until I started apprenticing at Onacia Healing Tools. And then they introduced me to a community that has grown into the Center for Sacred Studies, which is where I ended up training for, I spent 4 years apprenticing in Half Moon Bay, and then spent another 4 years training with the Center for Sacred Studies. And when I got to these places, they started talking about this thing called following energy. And it really gave me a framework and words for what I had already been experiencing in my life. And so just to say what I know, the way I would describe, what is following energy? For me, following energy is a paying attention to what happens inside of yourself through learning how to notice body sensations, learning how to notice your mind, to become more aware of what is happening inside and take responsibility for that. And it's also paying attention to what shows up in your daily life. As again, to me, it's often it's a call and response. So the biggest quote, the biggest point of instruction that I ever received about what is following energy is to stay behind the energy. Don't get ahead of the energy. And you can follow the energy of anything. So it arises, the Center for Sacred Studies is very much comes out of a very strong relationship with original people. So my teachers there have spent the last 30 years in direct relationship with original peoples from all over the planet, and have earned the trust and relationship to hold certain things there. And from that earth-based way of moving through the world where life is a spiral, the teaching of following energy and the conversation of following energy is a part of our community. So the biggest kind of quote rule or guide of following energy is to stay behind it. Don't get ahead of it. And that becomes a practice. That's a way of moving through the world. And it just so happens that way of moving through the world has been inside of me, since I was 15. So it was like a coming home.
We're going to get right back to Staci in a moment. First, a word from our sponsor, Rebel Therapist Mastermind. This is a high-level mastermind group for powerhouses, innovators, and leaders. If you're looking for both a mastermind and one-on-one business coaching, this might be your next program. You'll be with a smart, progressive group of therapists and healers, and you'll have one-on-one coaching from me, all of that for 8 months. This is not for the beginning entrepreneur. Go over to rebeltherapist.me/mastermind to apply, or you can find that link in the show notes. Okay, let's get right back to Staci. I'm wondering if we look at your business as a way that you're playing this out of staying behind the energy, how have you followed energy, or how do you follow energy now in your business? And when I say your business, I really mean all of it, like your services, the way that you are in the world as a healer.
Just give me a minute. So this is what I do, right? Like I'm taking in what you said. So first of all, what I want to say is that, how I am of service to the world through my energy healing work is that I hold a space with people where I help people and groups turn dead ends into doorways in their lives, turn what feels like a dead end for them into a doorway. And that actually, if we slow that down for a minute, what does it mean to turn a dead end into a doorway? What is the space between a dead end and a doorway? To me, that space between feeling stuck and moving forward, rebirthing your life, is the unknown, is a willingness to enter the unknown and to not know. And to me, that is where following energy lives. And so part of the space I've been holding for individuals and groups for over 20 years is to be a guide, a mentor, a spiritual midwife, to travel with individuals and groups through this unknown space to support them in growing what they need to rebirth their life. And that is a process of not only following energy, but actually learning to navigate energy. And the practices that I use are a combination of meaningful conversation, as well as energy healing practices like guided imagery and ceremony, and specifically dance ceremony. And all of that is a way for people to begin to find and discover and explore how they follow energy, how they learn to let go, how they learn to connect with something bigger than themselves that can be a guide and an inspiration. We can follow the energy of anything. You can follow the energy of a relationship. You can follow the energy of a podcast. You can follow the energy of a child. You can follow the energy of an intention, which is actually something, a way that I work really quite a lot with people, is working with intentions, not as a ego will-based outcome, but intentions as a inner conversation with the soul, with your soul in daily life, intentions as a way to co-create with the universe, with daily life, through following energy, through navigating energy. So like, how does that show up in my business? It's like, how doesn't that show up in my business?
That is your business.
That is my business.
Mm-hmm.
Like it shows up because I sit with a client, okay? And I sit and I listen. A session with me is usually 90 minutes, and I sit with someone, and the first 45 minutes, we're having dynamic conversation. I am not a therapist, so it's not about going back into the deep past. It is about holding space for what's happening in their daily lives. Usually it's about what is challenging. I have a specialty in anxiety and relationships. So often those 2 points are a focus of conversation. And I hold space and we explore what's happening. What does it mean? What are some of the lessons? How might you move through it? And then the second part of the session involves energy work, which means laying down, closing your eyes, going inside. I offer guided imagery. I offer, hands-on healing work. I offer what I work mediumistically, which means I support people in moving into territory through guided imagery. Some shamanic practices might call it journeying. And all of it is in service to getting behind my client's potential, getting behind my client moving through that doorway into, a new beginning. I'm actually following the energy of their healing, and I don't presume to know what it looks like. I stay in the unknown with them. And then I hold space as they learn to discover, as they learn to identify, as they learn to find their power and let go of whatever is not serving them. So that's one way I do it. I also follow the energy in terms of groups. I have a very, very long-standing, deep relationship with holding groups.
That actually, I was just thinking, if we zoom kind of up to 10,000 feet, like when you're figuring out what to offer, like when you're figuring out what to create for people, I'm wondering how you're following energy there, like in your 7 directions group, or in even creating a group. How does that happen for you?
So 7 directions is to me, it's not just a group. 7 directions is actually a teacher in my life. It's a dance ceremony that was born 19 years ago and that I have been in service to as a founder for this whole time. And so 7 directions is alive for me as this energy that talks to me and that I negotiate with a lot because it's dance. And so it wants to happen a lot. And so it's been a 19-year relationship where it has gone through a lot of different incarnations around, like, offering for a year, and then, just evenings. And then in 2010, a women's group landed where I started offering a 5-month, monthly women's dance. And that really landed 7 directions in a whole other way. And Women's 7 Directions is still alive and well. So it's been going on now for 11 years, and it's 2 sessions a year. So that's still happening. And it then created the foundation for a community to start to grow, through which I started offering retreat weekends, women's weekends. And then from that doorway, did the first facilitator training. So now we have facilitators besides me. And so that all of that has been a process of following energy.
And can you tell me more about that? Like how, for example, you can tell I'm like struggling with the language, but for good reason. I think it's really helpful for me, at least. That how did you follow the energy into the facilitator training?
So I pay attention to what shows up in daily life, and I am in service to my people as well as in service to, let's say, 7 Directions, which is, a ceremony. So I'm holding both, holding paradox. So part of learning how to follow energy, learning how to navigate energy, is a willingness to hold paradox and a willingness to be uncomfortable in the holding of paradox. And so what will start to happen is, let's say with 7 Directions, what started to happen was women started coming forward and saying, hey, I really want to become a facilitator. What does that look like? Or I want to learn how to assist. What does that look like? And I would take that in and sit with it. So part of following energy is you start to notice a sensation inside. You start to sit with it, meaning like a chicken on your egg, you're being with something. And then you pay attention to what happens around you, what happens in your relationships with people, what happens with things showing up. And so people started asking, like, hey, I want to assist. Hey, if you ever do a facilitator training, I want to be a part of it. So I had someone say, hey, I'm leaving California, and I'm not leaving without taking 7 Directions with me. So when are you going to start to do a training? And these people, and so gradually the way ceremony works is you start off as a participant, and then you move into assisting, and then you move into facilitator training. And I have not only, I have been sitting in circles, witnessing that kind of, moving through different roles for many years and assisting other trainings, right? So I have a relationship with that in other ways besides Seven Directions. And so I sat with it for a long time, and then it became obvious that there was a need for it. The person that I had been working with, who had been a co-facilitator, needed to move on and didn't have the same kind of time to devote to Seven Directions, and I needed help. So I kind of arrived at this point where if it was going to continue, I really needed help. So I opened the doorway for assistance, and then assistants came in, and then they started asking, about facilitator training. And then I took the leap and I offered it. And then they said yes. And that was the first one. I would love to give an example, a more recent example of how I followed the energy in the middle of 2020.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been following the energy, in all ways, but just to say to me, what feels really ripe about learning how to let go, learning how to connect, learning how to follow something bigger than ourselves, learning how to embrace the uncomfortableness of the unknown is what's been happening with this pandemic. And that, things that, I've had this instinctive relationship with this way of moving through the world for 20 years, and frankly feel like I've been being trained up in it because now we are experiencing in the world a collective dead ends into doorways moment. And so I'm here to be of service to that any way I can. And so the way it has showed up for me this year, for example, is that, when the pandemic came down and, we were sheltering in place. I'm in California. I'm in, literally in Pacifica, California, like I started noticing a lot of like, here we are sheltering in place. And I started noticing that we were, that either people were alone or people were with their families. There were kids coming home. And what I started noticing was a real stirring of the pot of codependence. And besides, one of the other big loves in my life, in addition to, individual sessions and holding dance ceremony is working with something called the triangles. That's all about transforming relationship with codependency into co-commitment, based on a book by my teachers called The Power of Humility. But I have been living with the triangles and teaching the triangles for 20 years. And so what started happening was I started noticing a lot of people feeling like a victim, a lot of people feeling really, edgy with their family members, a lot of people feeling really isolated and alone in their, sheltering in place. And I started talking with clients and noticing the energy with them. And they started saying, you know what? I'm having a really hard time with my spouse right now, and I'm going to lose it. Or I'm having a really hard time here or there. And like, Staci, I need a group. Like, I have clients that I've been holding, but they're like, I really need to talk to some other people about this. And so what started happening is I started talking to clients about it. I would go to Seven Directions, which shifted online, and that's another story, but started, mentioning it. And immediately I got the response of, oh, I want that. Oh, I want to do that. Oh, I need that. And I let it simmer inside for a while, a couple months. And then I sent out an email, came up with a form and sent out an email, launched it, and it was filled. And the group was supposed to be 2.5 months, but it was so powerful just sitting together and exploring what does it mean to shift out of codependence at this moment in time and be in a place of empowerment within ourselves and each other, and listening to each other's stories and experiencing energy practices, which I would offer. It was so powerful. The group ran instead of 2.5 months, it ran for 5 months. So that's an example of following energy to birth something new in the middle of a pandemic. Part of it is I grew very deep relationships with my people. Okay. And that's part of why eventually, like, I grappled with this question of, not becoming a therapist has been a touchstone of a conversation in my life as the path not taken. Would my life have been easier? Would it have been this? What if I just become a therapist? Right. But what the response that has always been is I needed a different frame. I needed to be outside of the box. I needed to be able to sit with people as clients as well as hold groups with them, as well as, I needed to have multi-level relationship with people in my life. I need to be able to do hands-on healing work. I needed something bigger than the therapy frame could offer me. And so I have a very deep relationship with my people. I love them. Okay. And I love them in a healthy, boundaried way. And I don't do a lot of self-disclosure. Like I'm well versed and trained up that way as the daughter of a therapist and my own professional integrity. But like the point is I love my people. So they, and I attune to them. So they will share with me what they want. And that doesn't mean they always get it. But but they know that we are like, this isn't just me making some choice to whatever. I am attuning to what is happening with my people and what they feel they need. And if it's in alignment with what's inside of me and what's happening in my life and where I feel called to put my focus and intention, I will take a leap and offer something. And oftentimes, in general groups, I have a lot of skill with, the marketing end of things and writing. I'm an author and I'm a big producer. I've got the back end kind of chops in order to get behind the vision that I am following. And I also have a lot of trust with my people because I've shown up for a lot of years with them and they know that. So if they're called back, then we go for it and we go on a healing journey together in a lot of different forms, whether it's through individual sessions or dance ceremony, or now I've been stepping into offering these practice and support groups because I am really convinced that that as individuals, we need to learn how to make the shift from codependency into co-commitment within ourselves first, then in our relationships in our lives, so that we can transform how we are in relationship with this planet and how we are in relationship, with globally with each other. So I believe that it's the tipping point of moving from a very power over way of being into a heartfelt way of life. And I want to be of service to that at this moment in time, especially.
Beautiful. You mentioned back end chops, and it just really, I love that wording in terms of like the production, knowing how to make the things happen behind the scenes. And I really just love the way you put that in context of kind of where it belongs. And especially because a lot of what I teach people is the back end chops. And it is only in service of what really needs to happen. It's not in service of like, let's just get the marketing skills. Let's just be like these great marketing machines or these great like behind the scenes machines. It's really about exactly what you just said. So I just loved it that was kind of like a throwaway comment for you, like, and I have the back end chops.
Yes, and to say that again, when you ask that very deep question of, well, how does following energy show up in my business? It's like, how doesn't it show up in my business? Because even the way I've done marketing, pretty much what a big theme in my life has been is that I've been presented with the way it should be done, become a therapist or, do marketing this way, or, even how you build your practice versus groups and all of that. And oftentimes I would have an instinctual reaction, or not just a reaction, an instinctual felt experience that would be like, uh-uh. uh-uh. And I'm fortunate that I have learned to really trust my intuition through my body sensations and also, how I perceive energy, so that I've learned to be able to trust what I perceive and be able to act on it in a different way, and have experienced that things have often worked out not only well, but better than I could have willed into existence had I followed the should. That what I have found is that, the way that I ended up, getting to publish a book, through a publisher, or the way that the facilitator training landed for 7 Directions, or even the way that this recent, support group landed, or even what's happening now with 7 Directions being online and growing exponentially during a pandemic. All of that has happened because of following energy, of navigating energy, of a will. And I just want to say, like, it's not a Pollyanna process, because often following starts with letting go, which means and letting go is a death process. So we need to let go of whatever it is that's not working inside of ourselves, with our belief systems, with, things that we need to excavate and pain from our lives, in order to clear space so that we can follow something bigger. So this is not like this wavy gravy kind of practice. This is a practice that really asks us to do some soul searching and to make some hard choices. And frankly, it's a practice that will challenge toxic energy in our lives. So it ends up inviting us to make a lot of concrete changes with who is even in our lives. So that's a whole other thing.
Ooh, I'm so glad you said that last part. Wow. Okay. So before
I know. So here we are.
so
at time.
good.
Yeah.
It's so good. So before we have to say goodbye, what are you excited about?
I am excited about virtual work. I was that person for 20 years, because I am a hands-on energy worker, because everything I did, was in person, with the exception of client work I could also do virtually. But everything else was in person. And so I had tremendous resistance to offering anything online, much less groups, much less dance ceremony. And through letting go of a lot of my perceptions, and through entering into a relationship with online work, which I've actually been doing for a couple of years already, that facilitated me then bringing all of my groups online because of COVID. And now what I am witnessing is how versatile online groups can be, how meaningful they can be, how they ask us, especially in ceremony, ask us to develop another level of our inner authority, really helps us challenge our codependence. And I'm really excited about online work. I miss being in the room with people, and I will be going back to that when it's possible. But I feel like a whole new doorway, let's say, has opened for me around how I get to be with people and how I get to connect with people in a way that wasn't accessible before, being one person holding, in one physical space at a time. So I'm really excited about virtual work, virtual healing, energy healing work. And it is possible, by the way, to do amazing energy healing through the airwaves. So while I can't physically touch people, because I work mediumistically, I'm still able to help energy and support energy movement with people, even through the screen, which is wild and amazing and powerful.
Wow. Thank you so much, Staci Boden.
You're welcome, Eddie. Thank you for this great journey. It was really fun getting to sit with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And I just want to, say to your people, because I know that, a lot of your people are, maybe straddling that edge of deciding whether to move out of the traditional psychotherapy box. And I just want to say, go for it.
Yes.
Go for it. Take the risk. The worst case scenario is you fall on your face, you have a good cry, you pick yourself up, you learn, and you do it better next time. But that the world really needs the level of integrity and the level of presence and commitment that I think that therapy training does. And for those practitioners to be out in the world doing other things so that they can share, that is a gift.
Oh my gosh, I'm like beaming right now. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now I'll loop back and share some takeaways that particularly stand out to me from our conversation. Takeaway number 1. For Staci, this journey to following energy started showing up as tingling in her hands. Where does it show up for you?
And it was shocking to me. I didn't really understand it at the time, but from then on, as I moved through life, whenever something, quote, spiritual was happening, my hands would tingle. So my hands became a barometer my tingling hands became a barometer to identify something spiritual happening and for me to pay attention to what was happening in daily life.
Takeaway number 2. Part of how Staci decides what to offer in her business is to follow the energy of her participants. One place this happened was with the 7 Directions facilitator training.
And so people started asking, like, hey, I want to assist. Hey, if you ever do a facilitator training, I want to be a part of it.
Takeaway number 3. Following energy means letting go of what no longer serves us. When I apply that to business, I see so many of you walking through that transition of letting go of the parts of your business that aren't the right thing any longer.
It's not a Pollyanna process because often following starts with letting go, which means and letting go is a death process.
Takeaway number 4, online work can be meaningful and effective. One of my favorite things about 2020 is how many incredible healers came into the online space and changed it forever. Staci had already worked online some, and during the pandemic, she brought every part of her services online and has found some benefits to clients that she hadn't expected.
What I am witnessing is how versatile online groups can be, how meaningful they can be, how they ask us, especially in ceremony, ask us to develop another level of our inner authority, really helps us challenge our codependence. And I'm really excited about online work.
Those are 4 of my biggest takeaways, and I would love to know what stands out to you. Email me at info@coachingwithannie and tell me what stood out to you, and even better, send me a voice memo, and I'd love to share your voice on the pod. You can find out more about Staci Boden at dancing-tree.com. I want to thank Cosmo Palms for editing this podcast. If you found this episode supportive, please share it with your favorite therapist or healer. That's how we reach and help more people. And thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next time. Well, that's making me think of what's my next question, which is, well, you never know what my next question is going to be. My next question was,